World AIDS Day is on the 1st of December, and with a group of friends, I will be walking the ribbon to raise money for the Terrence Higgins Trust, the UK's largest HIV and sexual health charity, and an organisation that's close to my heart. When the current lockdown eases, a group of 6 of us will walk this route together. I've created a route that's just under 30 kilometres in the shape of a ribbon, and visit 16 landmarks that are important in the history of HIV in London. During November, I visited the locations in order to film short videos on why these locations are important. I've edited these, together with other information about the history of HIV and AIDS, into this documentary-style film. I hope you enjoy learning more about the history of HIV. Please donate to the Terrence Higgins Trust, if you can, using the link in the description of the video. Thank you.
We start our walk here in Chelsea at the Royal Brompton Hospital. Here in 1981, a 47-year-old gay man who had recently arrived from the US died. He's thought to be the first person to have died in the UK from an AIDS-related illness. 7 months later at St Thomas's Hospital, Terry Higgins, who was 37, the same age I am now, died of an AIDS-related illness. In those days, AIDS wasn't a thing. It was known as GRID, gay-related immune disorder. It was thought that the condition only affected gay men.
By the next year, 1982, with cases confirmed in diverse heterosexual groups of people, such as haemophiliacs, intravenous drug users, and Haitian immigrants in the US, the collection of illnesses started to be known as AIDS, Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. So, what does that mean? Well, acquired because it was known that this illness was communicable, i.e. it could be passed from one person to another, not spontaneously occurring within someone's body, even if they didn't yet know what pathogen caused it. Immune, because they knew it affected a person's immune system, the part of the body that fights off infections. Deficiency, because they knew the immune system became deficient, and as a result, infections that would usually be harmless to people could take hold. And a syndrome, which is a collection of symptoms or medical signs that are correlated with each other. AIDS was associated with a certain set of opportunistic infections. There's a documentary from that time that's currently available on BBC iPlayer. It was first shown in April 1983, and it gives a fascinating insight into what the medical and scientific thinking was at the time, the period just after AIDS was named and just before the discovery of HIV. Search for Horizon Killer in the Village to watch it. So what is HIV? HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. It was discovered in 1983 and was later proven to be the cause of AIDS. There's more on the discovery of HIV later in our history walk. It was named HIV in 1986. However, despite its relatively recent discovery, HIV was not a new virus in the 1970s and 80s. It has since been proven that HIV had been present in some humans as far back as the early 1900s. So how is HIV transmitted? Well, HIV is present in 5 of the bodily fluids of people who are living with HIV and who are not on effective treatment. These bodily fluids are blood, semen, including pre-ejaculate, vaginal fluid, anal mucus, and breast milk. In order for HIV to be passed on from one person to another, enough quantity and quality of the virus in one of these bodily fluids needs to make its way into the body. HIV is quite a fragile virus and doesn't survive well outside the body for long. Exposure to things like light, air, and the wrong temperature inactivates the virus, so the bodily fluids usually have to go directly from one person to another. Historically, sex, both anal and vaginal, sharing needles, receiving blood transfusions, and transmissions from mother to baby were key sources of infection, but these days most transmissions are through unprotected sex in the UK. Public Health England estimated that in the UK as a whole in 2019, 41% of new transmissions occurred during unprotected sex between men, 38% during unprotected heterosexual sex, and around 3% through people who inject drugs sharing needles. 2% of transmissions were suspected to be from other causes. So, once HIV is transmitted, what does it do? HIV makes its way into the bloodstream, where it begins its journey to try and fulfill its main aim, to make as many copies of itself as possible. What made this virus particularly difficult to treat in the past is that it attacks and enters cells called CD4 cells. These are known as T helper cells, and they are a part of your immune system that helps to identify pathogens for the immune system to attack. Once inside the CD4 cells, the HIV virus changes its DNA and starts to produce lots of copies of itself. Eventually, the CD4 cell is killed. We now know that there are 4 stages of HIV infection. On this graph, the blue line and left-hand axis show how the CD4 cells are affected, and the red line and right axis show the amount of HIV in the system over time. The first stage is called seroconversion, primary infection or acute HIV. The virus multiplies relatively quickly into large numbers, and the number of CD4 cells begins to decline rapidly. At this stage, some people with the virus will experience a mild flu-like illness called seroconversion illness. It is during this period, in the first few weeks after infection, that a person is most infectious to others. After a few weeks, the immune system response is better and the number of copies of HIV in the bodily fluids declines. However, because of where HIV makes its home, the immune system can't fight it off completely. HIV continues to cause the destruction of CD4 cells. Over a period of years, the length of which varies from person to person, the immune system weakens. There are generally no symptoms in this period, and it's known as asymptomatic HIV, or latency. The person is still infectious to others, and there are no obvious signs of infection. When the CD4 cells are more depleted, typically 7 to 10 years later, symptomatic HIV can occur. That's when infections that the body would normally control first start to appear. In the final stage, which is known nowadays as late-stage HIV, telltale opportunistic infections start to appear. This is when an AIDS diagnosis can be given. This means that the CD4 cell count has fallen below 200 copies per milliliter of blood, and the person has an AIDS-defining illness, such as certain cancers, tuberculosis, and pneumonia. It is those diseases that can kill people. Late-stage HIV is thankfully rare in the UK because most people get an HIV diagnosis before reaching this stage, and treatment means that the virus is suppressed, and the illness can't progress. The earlier a diagnosis is made, the better in terms of both maintaining good health and ensuring that the person can't pass the virus on to anyone else. Things have come a long way since the first known AIDS deaths in the UK back in 1981. During the rest of this history walk, we will have a look at how treatment and prevention have improved over time, and how campaigning and activism by individuals and organisations have led the way in preventing deaths like those of the 47-year-old at the Royal Brompton and of Terry Higgins, after whom the Terrence Higgins Trust is named. We will also remember all those we have lost to the epidemic along the way. Please like and share this video, and donate to our fundraiser to help the Terrence Higgins Trust make HIV a thing of the past. The second stop on our HIV history walk is about an hour's walk away, passing Buckingham Palace and going through Green Park.
The second stop on our walk is here in the heart of Soho, 5016 Street, which is Europe's largest HIV clinic. 5016 Street and the organisation that runs it have also been at the heart of trying to get PrEP access for everyone. Their PrEP shop was a really important tool in the fight to get PrEP to people at a cheap price when it wasn't available on the NHS. Fortunately now, it is available on the NHS, and 5016 Street are leading the charge in making it available to the wider public.
To find out more about 5016 Street, which is an NHS service and part of the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital NHS Trust, go to their website at dean.st. 5016 Street are also running some groundbreaking health and well-being services for trans and non-binary people, covering a wide range of medical services, advice and therapy, and offering a safe space. They've also been selected by NHS England to run a pilot gender dysphoria service called Trans Plus.
Just around the corner is GAY Bar here on Old Compton Street. In 2011, the staff from 5016 Street set a world record for the number of people tested for HIV in one place in one day. Community-based testing like this in communities that are at higher risk of HIV has been and continues to be vital in the fight to eradicate HIV.
We then walk 25 minutes crossing Russell Square to our next location.
Here in Bloomsbury is Gay's the Word. This LGBT bookshop has been at the heart of the gay community since 1979. Above it is a plaque to Mark Ashton, a gay rights activist and founder of Lesbians and Gays Supporting the Minors. Ashton died of AIDS-related pneumonia in 1987 in Guy's Hospital. PCP, as it was known, was one of the most common AIDS-related illnesses that caused death in people living with HIV. Fortunately, with advances in treatment, it's now very rare in the UK. Gaze the Word is on Marchmont Street in Bloomsbury and is a fantastic place to pick up some great literature and learn more about LGBTQ+ history.
It's a short walk through Bloomsbury to the Gray's Inn Road for our next location.
This is Acorn House. The Terrence Higgins Trust moved here in 2005 from a location a little bit further down the Gray's Inn Road. It was from these two locations on the Gray's Inn Road that THT launched some of the most iconic campaigns.
From early campaigns of the 80s and 90s, such as those around the importance of the use of condoms and about World AIDS Day, to campaigns in the 2000s and 2010s informing people about new developments like PEP and rapid testing, the Terrence Higgins Trust has been at the forefront of informing people about HIV and advocating for those living with HIV for almost 4 decades. Here are some of the current campaigns you may be familiar with or may have seen advertised recently. The It Starts With Me and HIV Testing Week campaigns for HIV Prevention England tell us about all the ways that we can stop HIV by testing regularly, treating HIV in those who have it, and protecting ourselves through safer sex practices such as the use of condoms and PrEP. The Can't Pass It On campaign aims to spread the word about the amazing fact that people living with HIV who are on effective treatment can't pass the virus on to anyone else. And you may have seen the campaign to make PrEP more widely available. It's recently been made available for free on the NHS in England and is also available on the NHS in the rest of the UK. PrEP is a drug taken by HIV negative people. When taken correctly, it prevents you from being able to get HIV. Not to be confused with PEP, which is a drug which can prevent HIV after a risk has been taken. It's effective as long as you access PEP within 72 hours of a potential exposure, but should only be used in an emergency, for example if a condom breaks during sex. To find out more about how and where to get tested for HIV, how to practice safer sex, or to learn more about PrEP or PEP, or about HIV and other STIs, visit tht.org.uk and click on HIV and Sexual Health.
On a personal note, this is where I started volunteering with the charity on their helpline THT Direct back in 2018.
Staying in the King's Cross area, it's just a couple of minutes walk to Stop 6.
Here on Caledonian Road is Housemans Bookshop. This was the first home of the gay switchboard in the 1970s. In the early 1980s, Switchboard was the leading source of information about AIDS, and some of the volunteers who started in the basement of this bookshop went on to found some of the leading HIV charities in the UK, including the Terrence Higgins Trust. For more information about Switchboard, you can check out their podcast.
Each episode of the award-winning podcast The Logbooks centres on logbook entries made by the volunteers who staffed the Switchboard helpline. Series 1 covers the period 1974 to 1982 and includes calls about a whole range of the issues facing LGBTQ+ people, including sexual health and STIs in the era before AIDS. Series 2 covers HIV and AIDS, Section 28, and the media's attitudes to LGBT+ people in the 1980s and 90s. This is the part where I get to say, available wherever you get your podcasts. We walk about 25 minutes up the Caledonian Road to our next stop.
This is Cally Yard at the Holloway end of the Caledonian Road, and this is the new home of the Terrence Higgins Trust from 2020. It's from here that THT will help to lead the campaign to get the UK to zero HIV by 2030. That means zero new transmissions and zero HIV stigma.
So you might be thinking, that all sounds great, but how do we actually get to zero HIV by 2030? Well, getting there relies on 4 key pillars according to HIV Prevention England and the Terrence Higgins Trust. Testing to find the remaining people living with HIV who don't know their status. Treating those who test positive to preserve their health and well-being and ensure they can't pass on the virus. Promoting the correct use of condoms. And making PrEP available to all those who need it. For more on PrEP, see the other videos in this series. Although all of this is a big task, and it's a hugely ambitious target, there is some encouraging news on the testing and treatment front. The Joint United Nations Programme on HIV and AIDS, UNAIDS, coordinates global action on HIV and AIDS and aims to end HIV globally, with the additional goal by 2030 of ending AIDS-related deaths, which are relatively rare in the UK, but numbered around 700,000 globally in 2019. UNAIDS has a set of targets for countries as milestones along the way. One of the key targets is that by 2020, of those people living with HIV in a country, at least 90% should have had a diagnosis. Of those who are diagnosed, at least 90% should be on treatment. And of those on treatment, at least 90% should have achieved an undetectable viral load, which means that the virus is suppressed in their system and, crucially, they can't pass the virus on to anyone else. The most recent figures just released for 2019 show that in the UK, 94% of those living with HIV had been diagnosed. Of those, 98% were on treatment, and of those on treatment, 97% had an undetectable viral load and therefore can't pass the virus on to anyone else. This means that the UK has exceeded the UN's targets for 2020 for 3 years in a row, one of the first countries to do so. The equivalent UN targets for 2030 are 95, 95, 95, and the UK has almost reached those already at 94, 98, 97. London is at 95, 98, 97, meaning that in 2019, London had already exceeded the UN's targets for 2030 for the second year in a row. But while this is a major and hard-won achievement and to be celebrated, a lot of work still needs to be done to meet the goal of zero HIV by 2030. For example, according to the 2019 figures just released, 42% of new diagnoses were late diagnoses, with diagnoses in some specific groups, such as Black Africans and older people, particularly late. Some groups such as these face additional barriers to testing and treatment. The rollout of PrEP on the NHS in England has been delayed and underfunded, and cuts to the public health budget in the last 6 years have made the job of finding and treating the remaining cases that much harder. Underlying all of this, HIV stigma still persists and is hampering access to testing, treatment, and PrEP. Fear of the virus and misinformation about living with HIV, fear of the stigma associated with living with HIV, and fear of a positive diagnosis and what that would mean, all prevent people from getting tested. So you might be thinking, what can I do? Well, there are a few key things you can do. Look after your own sexual health and get tested for HIV. Testing is easier than ever. You can even test at home, and some test kits will even give you your own test results in a few minutes. Share the "can pass it on" message. People on effective HIV treatment cannot pass the virus on to anyone else. And challenge HIV stigma and misinformation when you see and hear it. If we all make these small efforts, then the goal of a society where new transmissions of HIV are a thing of the past is really achievable. And your donation to the Terrence Higgins Trust will help make that goal a reality. Thank you. Stop 8 on our HIV history tour is a short walk away.
This lovely old building in Holloway is now shared offices, and one of those offices is that of Positively UK, which is a charity which provides peer-led support, advocacy and information to people living with HIV. Peer support is vital for people living with HIV to help us increase our knowledge, confidence and connections. It's a key tool to help deal with and eradicate HIV stigma.
For more information about Positively UK and their services, visit positivelyuk.org. To get to the 9th stop on our walk takes about half an hour, crossing Highbury Fields.
This shared office building in Islington behind me was the location for many years of an organisation called the International Community of Women Living with HIV and AIDS. Women make up about a third of the people in the UK living with HIV, but over half globally.
UNAIDS estimates that globally, out of 38 million people living with HIV in 2020, just over 20 million were women and girls. In sub-Saharan Africa, young women are twice as likely to contract HIV as young men. It was estimated in 2018 that globally around 6,900 adolescent girls and young women aged 15 to 24 are newly infected with HIV every week. Ending AIDS by 2030 requires that we address girls' and women's diverse roles by putting them at the centre of the response and eradicating the cultural and political barriers to gender equality. In summary, 53% of people living with HIV globally are women.
However, despite this, women are often overlooked, or at least have been in the past, when it comes to things like HIV research, care, and diagnosis.
For more information on the issues facing women living with HIV in the UK and globally, check out the report Invisible No Longer, produced by the Sophia Forum and the Terrence Higgins Trust. The Sophia Forum is the only UK organisation focusing solely on women and HIV, and is the UK chapter of the Global Coalition on Women and AIDS. They focus on policy and advocacy, and on issues that affect women living with HIV, such as gender-based violence. Their website has lots of resources and information. Visit sophiaforum.net. Stop 10 on our walk is a short walk due east.
Here in Dalston are the offices of the Cara Society, which stands for Central Africa's Rights and AIDS. The organisation provides HIV prevention, care and support to help reduce premature deaths.
Let's have a closer look at HIV in Africa as a whole. UNAIDS estimates that of the 38 million people living with HIV globally, around 26 million are living in Africa. Of those, about 5 million live in Central and West Africa, and over 20 million live in Southern and Eastern Africa. South Africa and Mozambique alone account for about half of that, with just under 10 million people. This, in part, is due to the huge success of those countries' testing and treatment programs. South Africa has the world's largest antiretroviral treatment program, which is largely self-funded, and average life expectancy for the whole population has increased by 10 years in the last decade, in large part because of this program.
Here in the UK, African people often face barriers to accessing testing, treatment and support.
Some of those barriers for Black African people in the UK include wider racial inequalities in accessing health services more generally, fear of diagnosis and fear of stigma, which discourages people from testing in case they find a result they don't want, misconceptions about an individual's HIV risk, which can be an indicator that public health information is not reaching communities in the right ways, and fewer easy routes to testing, especially when compared to the options available to gay and bisexual men, for example. The results of these inequalities and barriers are plain to see in the official figures. 47% of HIV diagnoses among Black Africans in the UK were late, meaning that the virus had time to do significant damage to the immune system before diagnosis. There were more missed testing opportunities. For example, when attending sexual health services, 20% of Black African men and 35% of Black African women did not have an HIV test, compared with just 14% of gay and bisexual men. Black men, and in particular Black women, were much more likely to decline HIV testing. Knowledge and take-up of PrEP is lower among Black Africans in the UK. Health services are targeting most of their PrEP resources on gay and bisexual men. There's also some evidence that Black Africans might be suspicious or distrusting of PrEP. All of this leads to stigma and fear being perpetuated and compounded when HIV diagnosis is seen as something to be feared and when testing isn't seen as routine. However, we know what the potential solutions are. Some of these are more long-term and strategic solutions, like tackling the overall racial health inequalities in our society and working to eradicate HIV stigma in our culture. But others are short and medium-term practical solutions that we should be doing already, like more testing in the community, more information campaigns that are targeted and culturally appropriate, more routine HIV testing in general practice, hospital and other health settings, and culturally appropriate promotion of PrEP to those who would benefit most. One organisation that is leading the fight to eradicate HIV inequalities for Black, Asian and minority ethnic people is the NAS Project. They're London-based and led by Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, but they have a national reach through their events and programmes. For more information about NAS, check out their website at nas.org.uk. The Cara Society, which was the reason for this stop, is based in this historic building, which is a former printworks. Just around the corner is this amazing mural. We pass the halfway mark in our walk as we travel 30 minutes due south to our next location.
Behind me is Mildmay Mission Hospital. They've been providing HIV care since 1988, and the hospital here is the only inpatient HIV care facility in London.
Mildmay operates both in the UK and East Africa. The Mission Hospital in Hackney is at the forefront of specialist HIV service delivery and care. They deal with complex and severe HIV-related health conditions, including HIV-associated brain impairment, also known as HIV-associated neurocognitive disorder, or HAND.
Thankfully, with modern treatments, HIV isn't what it used to be, and living well into old age with HIV is commonplace these days.
This is borne out by research done in recent years, which shows that life expectancy is near normal for people living with HIV. In fact, studies have shown that someone diagnosed early with HIV today, who responds well to treatment in the first year after diagnosis, will have a longer average life expectancy than the general population. To find out more about Mildmay and their services, visit mildmay.org. It's about a 40-minute walk via Old Street to our next location.
This is Panther House in Mount Pleasant. This was the first major HQ of the Terrence Higgins Trust, and it was here in 1984 that the Terrence Higgins Trust helpline THT Direct was first established.
The THT Direct helpline is open 7 days a week and provides free and confidential advice and support around HIV and sexual health. Call THT Direct on 0808 802 1221. The call is free from landlines and most major mobile networks and won't appear in your bill. For our next stop, we take a short walk past Lincoln's Inn Field down the Theobald's Road.
This is Conway Hall near Holborn, and in 1983 a meeting was held here organised by the Lesbian Gay Switchboard and the Gay Medical Association about AIDS. It was through activism and meetings like this that the Terrence Higgins Trust was established later in 1983.
It was in that same year that a team at the Pasteur Institute in Paris discovered the HIV virus, which was later proven to be the cause of AIDS. Françoise Barré-Sinoussi and Luc Montagnier won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2008 for the discovery. In the 37 years since then, activism by groups such as those who organised the Conway Hall meeting has been central to the fight to get HIV and AIDS on the political agenda. It's a 25-minute walk back through our crossover point in Russell Square to our next stop. I'm in Fitzroy Place in Fitzrovia.
Just behind me, that red brick building is the Fitzrovia Chapel. It's the only part remaining of what was the Middlesex Hospital. Here in 1987, Princess Diana opened the Broderick Ward, which was the UK's first dedicated HIV and AIDS ward. She famously shook hands with AIDS patients without wearing gloves, to try and spread the message that casual contact could not pass on the virus.
The actions of high-profile allies, such as Princess Diana, were instrumental in helping to dispel some of the early HIV myths, and to help ensure that people living with HIV were treated with dignity, kindness, and respect, rather than fear and isolation. The next leg of our walk is a rather personal and familiar journey for me, and takes around 40 minutes.
Behind me is St Mary's Hospital in Paddington. It's part of the Imperial College NHS Trust, and they do some pioneering research on HIV. The Wharfside Clinic inside St Mary's Hospital is also where I've been getting treatment for HIV since I was diagnosed in 2013.
I've been on a few different medication regimens over the last 7 years, but at the moment I take 1 pill a day to stay healthy, and my immune system, which had been significantly damaged by the virus, has recovered to normal levels. Thanks to the amazing and exemplary care of the staff at St Mary's, I've been relatively physically healthy ever since my diagnosis. I'm extremely grateful to them for their work, their professionalism, and most of all, their kindness and compassion in the level of care they provide. The final leg of our journey is a 30-minute walk due west.
The last stop on our walk is here in Ladbroke Grove. This building behind me used to house the London Lighthouse, which opened in 1988 as a hospice and centre for HIV and AIDS care.
With the advances in treatment for HIV that came after 1996, the residential unit was happily no longer needed. It closed in 1998. The charity that ran the hospital merged with the Terrence Higgins Trust in 2000. The building itself was sold in 2015 and is now the Museum of Brands.
The Lighthouse Memorial Garden is the only part of Lighthouse that still exists. And in the garden, the ashes of many of the people who died at the hospice were scattered.
It's really important that, as part of this walk, and on World AIDS Day more generally, we pause to remember all of those we have lost to the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and to resolve to do all we can to help find, test, and treat people with HIV. With your help and your donation to the Terrence Higgins Trust, we can get to zero HIV. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and share, and don't forget to donate.